Now, to a story I'm sure you may have seen over the weekend, a tragic story, of course. Alex Pretty, who was killed over the weekend in the US. He was one of these anti-ICE protesters. He rocked up to a protest with a gun and he ended up being shot dead by an ICE officer. Now, this is blown up in the United States. There have been protests in the US, all over the US as a result of this. Of course, the protesters say that he was doing nothing wrong. And of course, ICE says, well, he rocked up to a protest with a gun and we were worried for our safety and we acted upon it. Here is the Homeland Secretary, Kristi Noem.
I don't know of any peaceful protester that shows up with a gun and ammunition rather than a sign. This is a violent riot when you have someone showing up with weapons and are using them to assault law enforcement officers.
Now, this happened in Minneapolis in Minnesota, and Minnesota over the last couple of weeks has been the stage for quite a few of these protests and altercations between the protesters and ICE officers. So cop a load of this from the Governor of Minnesota and, of course, former Vice Presidential candidate Tim Walz, who makes one of the most bizarre and offensive comparisons between what ICE is doing in Minnesota, which is rounding up and trying to deport illegal immigrants, to Anne Frank.
We have got children in Minnesota hiding in their houses, afraid to go outside. Many of us grew up reading that story of Anne Frank. Somebody's going to write that children's story about Minnesota. And there's one person who can end this now.
I'm honestly lost for words. How with a straight face do you make that comparison? Anne Frank, who was being pursued so they could kill her in the Holocaust, is the same as the US saying, if you come here illegally, you shouldn't stay in our country.
Yeah, there's some problems with his analogy, aren't there? Not least of which Anne Frank was not a foreign invader. She was arrested and ultimately put in a concentration camp by foreign invaders. And the other irony there is that Tim Walz, during the pandemic, was urging Minnesotans to dob their neighbours in. Tim Walz would have dobbed Anne Frank into the Nazis had he been around during the Second World War.
Yeah, it's just disgusting. And this is not the first time we've seen the Democrats in the US use rhetoric that compares the Trump administration to Nazis. All it does is ratchet up the violence, the anger, and that's exactly what they want to achieve. Tim Walz is loving watching riots. He's loving watching Minnesota burn. He certainly did during the BLM riots as well.
Well, his wife famously said she loved to have the window open. So she could smell the flames and the fumes coming from the protests.
It's disgusting. But you know what the irony is? Trump's head of ICE is Tom Homan. Tom Homan was acting ICE director under Obama. Obama deported over 3 million people. To celebrate Tom Homan's work, he was awarded with a presidential honor. This same guy is now doing the exact same thing he did for Obama, and he's doing it for Trump. There were no protests back then. In fact, CNN followed Obama and ICE people around and praised their work in the deportations. But now that it's Trump doing it, all of a sudden you have mass riots, you have the left-wing media throwing a tantrum, you have Democrat politicians talking about how bad it is. It is so hypocritical, and it's not about illegal migrants. They always used to be on a bipartisan ticket on the fact that you need to control the border. It is actually about undermining the Trump administration. And unfortunately, it is working to an extent. It is sowing division in American society, but it's a losing strategy for them in the long run, because what they're saying is they support illegal criminals more than they support law and order.
There is the little matter also of an investigation going on in Minnesota as to how huge amounts of money were defrauded from the state under Tim Walz's watch. I think he's quite happy to talk about Trump rather than what's been happening in his own state's finances.